Please welcome Margery Arent-Safir.
Good morning. Thank you to the Municipal Art Society for including our session. You've heard the objective scientific information about global warming. We will be the subjective session because ours has that keyword art in it. Our session is called Landscape, Art, Climate. It's the second installment of a new partnership between the Arts Arena in Paris, which I head, and the Municipal Art Society of New York that began last June with Thomas Woltz speaking in Paris. It's called the Arts Arena Municipal Art Society Paris, New York Series on Cities, with 2 annual events, one in each of the 2 cities. Specifically, this session today is in anticipation of what you just heard. The United Nations Paris Climate Conference, known as COP21, to be held in Paris November 30th to December 11th, with the aim of signing the first legally binding and universal agreement on climate to keep global warming below 2 degrees centigrade. Joining me today are Thomas Woltz, principal and owner of the award-winning firm Nelson Byrd Woltz Landscape Architects, dubbed by the Wall Street Journal in 2013 as Design Innovator of the Year, and Robert Storr, Dean of the Yale School of Art, formerly Senior Curator at MoMA, and Commissioner of the 2007 Venice Biennale, named by New York Magazine as one of the most influential people in contemporary art in America. As I said, ours is a subjective session. Climate does not know aesthetics or city limits. How can the arts energize what you've just heard, what the sciences have already told us? Can the arts engage diverse audiences, call them to action, awaken a movement impossible for lawmakers and industrialists to ignore? Is this the role of the arts? With these questions, we're going to look first at one moment, which is France's current mobilization of international artists to push for a Paris Climate Accord, then one project, New York Hudson Yards landscape design, and then going global and arriving at the hard questions, what artists everywhere could be doing as advocates for climate and the multiple complexities of their doing it, all in 20 minutes or less. I'm from Paris, so I get to start. And I'm going to begin with an informational, peppered inevitably with some editorial comments. The images behind me will show you what is going to go on in Paris, get a preview from November 30th to the December 11th. COP21 will bring some 30 to 50 delegates, journalists and activists to the city. In addition, Paris's City Hall has invited 4,000 French mayors to the city. Yet we can all imagine the conference attendees and the mayors cloistered in some meeting halls in one corner of the city, with only the civil servants, the police, and the press knowing that the conference is going on at all. But instead, the French government has turned to and mobilized the arts sector, not only French but international artists, with the goal of saturating the city with a conversation on climate that no one in the French capital will be able to ignore. No one will be able to ignore that this critical conference is taking place or the issues it addresses. 94 artistic projects will be in place, as I said, some of which you're seeing behind me.
Roll the slides.
In a city of 40 square miles, which is very small, and this comes out to more than one artistic event every half mile. You really will not be able to ignore this. Some will take place in museums or in the Grand Palais, but overwhelmingly, the venues are the city's public spaces and outdoor spaces. So if you had never heard of climate before in your life, you will not be able to ignore it between November 30th and December 11th. Theater, dance, music, performance, public art, participatory art, with three main tendencies. One is show us how beautiful the planet is, with the implicit threat of loss. The second tendency is horror and scare tactics. And the third is to put a focus on innovation, on the solution, rather than the threat. Our proposal, one proposal, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that are going to be taking place, is to project the glorious images of Yann Arthus Bertrand's Earth Seen from Above on every building of the Champs-Élysées in Paris. You will notice that if that happens. Others include an app that will focus light on the Eiffel Tower and visually transform the city of light into a giant forest of light trees. Nuage vert, green cloud, is another design, and you will recognize it when it gets shown behind me, that projects a green laser on pollutants in the air so that people can actually see, be made aware of, what are too often the city's invisible killers, namely the air that they are breathing. A project called Mythos 21 brings together a good number of Europe's most prestigious national theaters to sign a pact to use sustainability principles in both the philosophy and management of their cultural institutions. A giant kind of neon, if I can put it this way, that says réchauffement, which is global warming in French, is made up of frozen water from the planet's 13 most polluted rivers and is placed smack in front of the UNESCO building with the Eiffel Tower behind. And finally, there's a project called Human Energy. People power, literally people power illuminating the Eiffel Tower by using the energy produced by people dancing and pedaling on a huge surface beneath it. No one can guarantee the quality of all of these 94 artistic projects, and priority has been given to young and emerging artists. But what's notable, and what I think is important for this summit, is the city's and the government's recognition that the arts can reach a public that the government itself cannot, and calling into action and supporting a battalion of artists to do just that. For the time of COP21, Paris will no longer be the Moulin Rouge or painting the town red. It will be painting the town, the city, green. No one in Paris will ignore the climate conference. This is intelligent public policy, not only for mobilization around what is the issue of our time, but also for the brand France. France is an exporter of culture. To actively put forth the arts and culture when the cameras of the entire world are looking at Paris is intelligent public policy. France can do this because it has a centralized ministry of culture. I'll conclude with the editorial part. Should this be a role for the arts? What about the arts' privilege of not needing to be about anything? Do the innovative projects or the projects that focus on innovation unwittingly undermine those that seek to scare us into action, lulling us into a kind of promise that we don't have to do very much, technology will find a way? Do people understand that the Earth will survive, but we as a species will not? That the threat is not to the planet, but to us? And then what happens? On December 12th, climate accords signed or not, The Eiffel Tower will once again be lit by electrical, not people power. How does awareness, and certainly the city's efforts with these artists will achieve awareness, translate into action? What do we in Paris and all of us everywhere do when the party's over? Now, turning to New York. Thomas, you're a landscape architect. Most of us think we know what art is and what climate is, but what, in your definition of the term, is landscape, and how is it related to the other two and your design for Hudson Yards?
Well, as a practicing landscape architect, I often find myself trying to explain the profession. So often it's poorly understood, and the way we practice it at Nelson Byrd Woltz and many of our peers practice it is really a bridge between culture, civil engineering, ecology, and art. And I think the toolkit that landscape architecture has through the training we're given, through our licensure, through our mentorship programs, is uniquely adapted to tackle some of these difficult questions of both climate, but using the training as an artist to reach people in a different way beyond what civil engineering and good restoration ecology can do. So we really try to weave those stories together within all of our projects. Hudson Yards, because we're in New York and because we're on a panel about resilience and climate change, I thought I would just use that to illustrate this. This is the landscape plan at the center of the Eastern Yards. It's a 6.5-acre plaza amidst the 13 acres of the Eastern Yards. This is the development owned and constructed by Related Corporation. We were hired, I guess, 3.5 years ago to begin the landscape architecture of the site, which is everything from building face to building face. It's not the plantings. It's actually so much more than that. And all along, we've done what Nelson Byrd Woltz attempts to do, which is weave the cultural stories of this place, the historic things that happened here, like drilling the first tunnel to connect New York to New Jersey, happened on this site, to showcasing the native plants of the New York region, to really being a connector for all the different public spaces and parks of the district. So in this slide, you're seeing to the left giant block. You know, Hudson Yards is currently a 28-acre hole in the city, about 25 feet below grade. There is no connectivity here. There's nothing happening. However, through our research, we found out about this historic tunnel being built here. We looked even the fact that 300 years ago was a wet meadow on the edge of the city. So dropping in the plan, you can see where the skyscrapers going up now are going to frame this landscape. The ellipses are really about capturing an energy at the heart and bringing a massive work of art to the very center that will be this kind of iconic structure of the public plaza. 50% of the development is open to the public and being built as public space, which is extraordinary within the city. But what you're seeing is the High Line rising up from the south, the Hudson River Parks, and then Hudson Boulevard Park connecting. So this giant plaza, more like the Campidoglio or Piazza San Marco, is a massive plaza at the center of the project. This is showing all of that connectivity of the different parks into the central plaza. The exciting thing for me, practicing as a landscape architect, that's surprising to the outside world but feels perfectly logical, is that our firm has been in dialogue with all of the engineers from the very beginning about the caisson placement, the tunnels, the structural capacity, the utilities, the soil tanks, and then ultimately the thing that the only thing people will think we did, which is the plants and pavement.
The flowers.
The flowers. That is the top layer. But this, for an article that David Dunlap did in the New York Times, they put together this club sandwich that shows what our responsibilities have been. And some of the initiatives for resilience have been a 60,000-gallon tank that captures all the rainfall that falls on the site inside of this sandwich. Remember, 30 train lines have to continue working, not only during construction, but into the future. So we're up at the level of the High Line. Inundation wasn't our problem. capturing stormwater in the face of resiliency, creating shade and an immersive quality of horticulture. So this is a slide of what it will look like looking up to the culture shed. The work of art by Thomas Heatherwick has not been unveiled yet, so I can't show that, even though this is our art and landscape panel. And this is a sense of the immersive quality. We have struggled to get every single tree. We're on a slab that's 18 inches to 7 feet thick with engineered soils. We have to hold all the things that we take for granted on the planet Earth. We have to hold up in this tray to create an experience like this, an immersion in New York's native horticulture.
Looks gorgeous. We can't wait to see it.
I can't either.
Before moving on to Robert Storr, for whom we've saved all the really tough questions, I want to tell you what you're going to be seeing behind him. It's the work of James Balog, a photographer who has an amazing project called Extreme Ice. He has 47 cameras set up around the world, and he will show icebergs melting in real time. It's the most effective work that I know because he hits us simultaneously with the absolute beauty of these icebergs, and we realize that as we're watching and admiring the beauty, we're in truth watching them die. How's that for an introduction to you?
Not bad.
Do you have something you want to say, or do you want me to?
I have some things to say. Or you want to ask a question? Either way.
No, you go ahead.
It is entirely appropriate that artists address these issues because in the dialectic between nature and culture, defining where the line might be is one of the primary questions of the last several generations. There have been any number of artists who have touched on this in ways that sometimes make them part of the problem, sometimes part of the solution, or at least help inform the solution. Some of the land art done in the 80s was really a renewal of the idea that making a mark on the land was itself an important thing to do, regardless of the costs. Other people have made work with the land, which is much more sympathetic to the kinds of issues that we're talking about here. One in particular is Alan Sonfest, who has a park downtown on Broadway, LaGuardia Place and Houston, which is a fenced-in area where the natural growth of this region continues to happen. The problem, of course, is because of the nature of that growth, almost nobody notices the park. And one of the difficulties of making work which is sympathetic to the larger cause is it may indeed go unnoticed, because natural time is slow, art time, fashion time, and urban time is generally fast. There are other people like Mel Chin who have made projects where he has developed a way of presenting algae that eat oil or petrochemical materials, and there are dozens and dozens of other people who've addressed this in one way or another. There is, however, very little art that can properly be called environmental, and very little of that is good. And one of the problems in all art which has a cause or a particular purpose to express is it very often rushes to say what it has to say and doesn't think about the means by which it says it or the context in which it says it. It tends to preach rather than to convince by being a synthesis of all of the ingredients that make for good art and that make for a statement about such things. And I think that's one of the things I would post for people who are addressing this issue. You do not want to have things that are emblems of your good intentions, I would say collectively, our good intentions. You want to have things that actually make us think differently about them. Sometimes those things happen to be things that challenge the way we think about them, not to deny them, but to make it harder to rush to judgments. So I will cite simply one of them now, and it's a piece, well, I'll say one other thing. There's a landscape painter, truly a landscape painter named Rackstraw Downs, MacArthur winner, who has spent the last 30 years painting the area around New York City and around Texas. And what he paints is not the beautiful bucolic landscape of the Hudson River. He does not paint the way we would like the world to remain. He paints the way it is. And his pictures, which are small, which are conservative in technique, are a document of the change of land use in the region and in other parts of this country. So one place to go to it is to very conservative art, that is stylistically conservative art, which has a very radical point to make. But another one is somebody who makes a point almost against us, but not. And that's Chris Byrd. Some years ago, Chris made a piece called Medusa's Head, which I acquired from the Museum of Modern Art. It's a gigantic, and I mean gigantic, something like 12 feet across, sort of globe. And it's a representation, a literalization of predictions made in the 19th century about the depredations that the railroads would bring to us. And they said basically that the railroads would overrun the surface of the world, perforate it, and destroy it. And so what Chris did was to make this gigantic, ugly thing, fill it full of Lionel trains, make it look like sort of a totally dystopian vision, and then, of course, to remind us that that is not what happened. So as we look at the future, as we think about these pictures, which do sell something that is happening, so it's not a question of predictions, and we can, because we have better science, roughly tell what will be the consequences of this, we should also be very careful that we retain criticality in all directions, and we can look to art to do that.
Can you put on the video, please? I think it's going to illustrate what Rob just said. Is it on? Okay. This is still James Balog's work. And just in conclusion, I think we all know that if we don't get things right on this issue, any other issue we're discussing in terms of urban development, cities, social issues, peace, war, simply won't matter. As the French foreign minister who will head COP21, Laurent Fabius, summed it up, we are the first generation to really be aware of climate change and global warming, and the last generation that can deal with it. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Thomas.
That's